Today I woke up with a clear sense that the past never dies. It just waits for its time in the shadows of memory. I'll be 84 years old in a month, but the memories of what happened 10 years ago are still sharp, like shards of glass under my skin. My name is Percy Hawkins. All my life I've taught linguistics at the small but respected Rowlett University. At 74, I was still full of vigor, lecturing, writing articles, having lively discussions with colleagues. My collection of rare books on ancient languages was the envy of many specialists in our field. Some copies were worth a fortune, but for me their value was measured not by money, but by the knowledge carefully preserved between the old bindings. I bought my house on Wisteria Road when I was young and married to Veronique. She died 15 years ago from cancer. Our only son Tristan never shared my academic pursuits. Even at school he was only interested in money and status. Veronique always excused him, saying he was just practical. After college, Tristan got a job as a real estate agent and married Sabina, a cold and calculating woman who worked as an accountant. They had 2 children, my grandchildren Austin and Iris. Tristan and Sabina always kept a low profile. They came to visit twice a year, Christmas and my birthday, as if they were performing an unpleasant duty. I tried to establish a relationship with my grandchildren, but Sabina found reasons each time to cut the visit short. Everything changed after a small stroke I suffered 10 years ago. The doctor said I would make a full recovery. I just needed to follow a regimen and take my medication. "You need care, Dad," Tristan said during the hospital visit. It was the first time I'd heard concern in his voice in years. "I can take care of myself just fine," I countered. "It was just a micro stroke, Tristan. Dr. Pemberton said I'd be as good as new in a month." Sabina put her cold hand on mine. "Percy, you can't be objective. We can see how difficult this is for you. When I visited you the week before your stroke, you had a mess in your house, unwashed dishes." I wanted to argue that that wasn't true. Sabina hadn't visited me. But she continued, and there was such concern in her words that I almost believed her. "Tristan and I have talked it over. We want you to move in with us." I refused at first. My home was my fortress, my world. But they wouldn't give up. Every day they came to the hospital making new arguments. Now I realize it was a siege, methodical, planned. "I can manage on my own," I said. "What if you have another attack?" "Ah," Tristan asked. "You live alone, Papa. Who's going to help you?" "I have friends, co-workers, who you see once a week." Tristan shook his head. "Be realistic." Slowly their words crept into my consciousness, poisoning my mind with doubts. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really am too old to live on my own. After I was discharged from the hospital, I found that Tristan had already prepared a room for me in his house. But within a week, it became clear that this solution was not working. Sabina was constantly annoyed by my habits. Tristan was staying late at work. The grandchildren avoided me as if I were a stranger invading their territory. "Dad, we think you'd be better off at Sunny Hills," Tristan said one morning. "In a nursing home?" I couldn't believe my ears. "It's not a nursing home," my son quickly corrected me. "It's a rehabilitation and care center. There are nurses, doctors, a community. You won't be lonely." "I want to go back to my home," I said. Sabina and Tristan looked at each other. "We don't think that's a good idea," Sabina said softly. "You need constant care, at least during your rehabilitation." "And my house? My book collection?" "The house will be waiting for you," Tristan assured her. "We'll take care of it. And the books, they're safe." I resisted, but every day I felt my will weaken under their pressure. They isolated me from the outside world. When friends called, Sabina said I was resting or not feeling well. When I asked for my phone, it turned out that it had been forgotten to be charged or had disappeared somewhere. 2 months later, I found myself in Sunny Hills, a dreary building with the smell of medication and despair. Tristan had brought me here for a couple weeks until the doctors would let me go home, but the weeks turned into months. Every time I asked Tristan to take me home, there was a new excuse. "The doctors say it's too soon for you, Dad. They're renovating the house. It's impossible to live there now. First, they have to install special handrails, adapt the bathroom." On one visit about 6 months later, Tristan came with some papers. "What is it?" I asked, looking at the papers. "It's just a formality, Dad. I need your consent to extend your stay here. The insurance company wants your signature. I didn't read the fine print. I had a headache that day. Later, I found out I'd signed a power of attorney to manage my estate. Tristan became my financial guardian. The visits became less and less frequent. First once a week, then once a month. Finally, Tristan showed up with news that changed everything. "Dad, we had to sell your house." I stared at him, not understanding. "Sell it? But why?" "Your medical care is expensive. Insurance doesn't cover everything. Besides, the house was standing empty, needing care. And my books? My collection?" My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. "We kept the most important things," Tristan said evasively. "The rest. You see, we needed money for your treatment." In that moment, I realized the depth of their betrayal. They didn't just evict me, they stole my life, my home, my legacy. "I want to see a doctor," I said, "right now." Tristan tried to talk me out of it, but I insisted. When Dr. Stern came in, a short man with attentive eyes, I asked him a direct question. "Doctor, do I need to stay here permanently for medical reasons?" He looked at me in surprise, then at Tristan. "Mr. Hawkins, you recovered from your stroke 4 months ago. Of course, at your age, it's advisable to have someone around, but you have no medical contraindications for independent living." Tristan's pale. "But you said yourself." "I never said that your father needed to stay in an institution. On the contrary, I recommended an active lifestyle and a return to routine." That conversation opened my eyes. I was too trusting, too weak to resist my own son's manipulations. Contrary to my expectations, the realization of betrayal did not break me. It rekindled a fire that I thought had long been extinguished. A week after that meeting, I left Sunny Hills. Without a home, without savings, with a small pension and a suitcase of belongings. Tristan and Sabina didn't try to stop me. They had already gotten everything they wanted. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of Rowlett. The furniture was old, the ceiling leaked during the rains, but it was my space, my freedom. I tried to contact former co-workers, but many had already died or moved away. Those who remained looked at me with pity, a poor old man abandoned by his family who had lost everything. Then I swore to myself, this is not the end of my story. I would regain my dignity. And one day Tristan and Sabina would regret what they'd done. Not for the money or the house, for the betrayal of trust and the love I gave them. During those long nights in the small apartment, when sleep wouldn't come and the pain of betrayal stung my soul, I imagined meeting them. I saw their faces when they would realize that their plan hadn't worked. I had survived. I was stronger. This vision warmed me in my darkest moments. My new life began in a tiny apartment on the 5th floor of an old building with no elevator. Each climb up the stairs was difficult, but I saw it as part of a necessary physical activity. 75 is not the time to give up, I told myself every morning, looking in the mirror at my gaunt, wrinkled face. The apartment was one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom where I could barely fit myself. There was no trace of my former comfort. A creaky bed, a rickety chair bought at a thrift store, and a rickety table. But even here, I tried to create a semblance of a workplace. A few books on linguistics, which I managed to buy at the flea market, stood on a makeshift shelf made of boards and bricks. The first months were the hardest. My pension was barely enough to pay my rent and eat modestly. I saved money on everything from electricity to food. I sat for hours in the public library to avoid spending money on heating in my apartment. There I also tried to reconstruct my scientific notes from memory, decades of research stolen along with a collection of books. Occasionally I saw Tristan and Sabina in town. They defiantly turned away as if I were a leper. One day I ran into them at the supermarket. They were pushing a cart full of expensive groceries, and I was standing in line with 2 packs of pasta and a jar of tomato sauce. Sabina whispered something in Tristan's ear, and they both laughed, looking in my direction. In that moment, the bitterness of betrayal came over me with renewed force. I wasn't just abandoned, I was an object of ridicule. That all changed one rainy evening as I sat in a coffee shop, stretching out my cup of tea to stay warm longer. At a neighboring table sat a young man with a laptop computer, glancing at me every now and then. Finally, he came over. "Professor Hawkins?" he asked uncertainly. "Is that really you?" I stared at his face, trying to remember. "Adrian Pratt," he introduced himself. I took your course in comparative linguistics 8 years ago. You helped me with my thesis on the parallels between ancient Scandinavian languages and modern English. The memory was slowly coming back. Adrian was one of those rare students who came to lectures not for a grade, but out of a genuine love for the subject. A smart guy with an unusual perspective on language structures. Sure, Adrian, I smiled, feeling unexpected warmth. How are you? What are you doing now? He told me that he was working for a technology company called NextGen Solutions, which develops machine translation programs. They were trying to create an algorithm that could not just translate text, but also preserve cultural nuances, idiomatic expressions, subtext, all the things that make a language alive. And our engineers are brilliant programmers, but they lack a deep understanding of linguistic structures, Adrian explained, especially when it comes to ancient languages or rare dialects. We talked for almost 3 hours. I forgot about the cold tea, about my wet shoes, about my miserable apartment. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Professor Hawkins, not just a discarded old man. At the end of the conversation, Adrian made a life-changing suggestion. Professor, would you be interested in working as a consultant for our company? Your knowledge is invaluable to the project we're working on. I was stunned. Adrian, I'm 75 years old. I doubt your company would be interested in an employee of my age. Age doesn't matter, he replied confidently. Only knowledge and experience matter. And you have more than our entire department combined. That's how my new career began. At first, I worked remotely, a few hours a week. NextGen paid enough for me to move into a better apartment with heating that worked all winter, not just when the landlord relented. In addition, returning to academic work gave me something that material comfort could not: self-esteem. For too long, I had lived with the feeling that I had been discarded as an unwanted thing, that my life was over. Now, however, I could feel my intellect coming alive again, my former clarity of thought returning. Every morning I woke up with new ideas, hurriedly writing them down before starting the workday. Some nights I couldn't sleep at night, pondering the solution to yet another linguistic puzzle. This mental activity seemed to rejuvenate me. Even my neighbors began to notice that I looked better, moved more energetically. My job was to analyze language patterns and advise programmers on linguistic structure. I found that a computerized approach to language refreshed my own views on a subject to which I had devoted a lifetime. A new vision emerged, fresh ideas. One day, while parsing another algorithm, I noticed a fundamental error in the approach to translating complex grammatical constructions. Programmers tried to create a universal template, but languages don't work that way. They are organic, full of exceptions and nuances. I sketched out an alternative scheme based on recursive context analysis. My approach relied not on fixed rules, but on statistical models that took into account a variety of factors, from the historical development of the language to the cultural context. It was an idea I had nurtured for years but never had the opportunity to realize. Adrian was delighted. "It's brilliant, Professor," he exclaimed after studying my notes. "This is exactly what we've been missing." Over the next few months, I worked shoulder to shoulder with a team of programmers to translate my concept into code. I moved closer to the company office and spent most of my time there, despite my age. The enthusiasm of my young colleagues energized me in a way that I hadn't felt since my teaching days. The NextGen team accepted me as one of their own. No one looked at me as a strange old man who belongs in a nursing home. On the contrary, young developers often came to my office to consult or just to talk. I became not only a colleague, but also a kind of mentor, and for some of them, even a friend. I became especially close to Rachel Kim, a young linguist of Korean descent. She was interested in ancient Scandinavian mythology and once brought me an exquisite edition of the Elder Edda with detailed commentary. This book became the first in my new collection. Gradually, a whole library grew around it, not as impressive as the previous one, but no less beloved. Our prototype translator performed beyond all expectations. It didn't just translate texts, it understood the context, captured nuances and adapted idioms so that they retained their meaning in the target language. The system worked especially impressively with ancient texts, where context is critical. Company executives were so impressed that they offered me a full-time position and a stake in the patent. At 76, I became a full-time employee of a technology company, a situation that must have confused Tristan and Sabine if they had known about it. The money I started making was beyond my wildest expectations. For the first time in a long time, I could afford not only the necessities of life, but also small pleasures. Good wine, new clothes, theater tickets. I moved into a spacious apartment in a good neighborhood and began to assemble a new library. At one point, I caught myself thinking that I hardly thought about Tristan and Sabine, about the lost house and collection. The betrayal still hurt, but the pain had faded and faded into the background, giving way to new interests and concerns. I realized that I could build a new life, even starting almost from scratch at 75. 2 years later, our project attracted the attention of major market players. The technology giant Global Tech offered to buy the patent for a sum of 6 zeros. As co-owner of the intellectual property, I received a significant share, money I could not even dream of in my academic years. Adrian, who had by then become a close friend of mine, suggested a celebration. "Soon, Ramon, we should celebrate properly, Professor," he said, pouring champagne into glasses. "You deserve this success." "I owe it to you, Adrian," I replied. "If you hadn't recognized me in that coffee shop—" "No," he shook his head firmly. "It was your intelligence, your knowledge that created the algorithm. I was just in the right place at the right time." That night, looking at the city lights from the restaurant window, I thought about the vicissitudes of fate. 10 years ago, when Tristan and Sabine had taken my house and collection from me, I had thought my life was over. Now at 84, I was richer than ever, doing what I loved and feeling needed. But despite my outward success, there was an unhealed wound deep inside. I hadn't just lost my house and books, I had lost my family. The opportunity to see my grandchildren grow up. No amount of money could compensate for this loss. And the happier my professional life became, the more acutely I felt this emptiness. One day, while browsing the local Rowlett newspaper online, I came across a photo from the grand opening of a new shopping center. Among the guests, I noticed Tristan. He looked older than I remembered and somehow anxious, despite smiling for the camera. Next to him stood Sabina, much changed, with a tense expression on her face, and just off to the side were two teenagers I barely recognized. My grandchildren, Austin and Iris, now almost grown. This random photo stirred something that had been slumbering deep inside. I began searching for information about Tristan and his family, first through social media, then by hiring a private investigator. And what I learned made me rethink my plans. It turned out that Tristan wasn't doing as well as you might think from the photo. His real estate agency had fallen on hard times. Clients were leaving, creditors were pressing. The house, my former home, had a mortgage they were struggling to pay. Moreover, the relationship between Tristan and Sabina had clearly broken down. They hardly ever appeared together in public, and when they did, they were estranged. This information awakened contradictory feelings in me. Part of me felt grim satisfaction. Justice, albeit belated, caught up with those who betrayed me. But another part of me thought about my grandchildren, about what it would be like for them to grow up in a family torn apart by financial problems and mutual distrust. I spent the next few months thinking about how to manage my unexpected wealth. I invested some of the money with the help of a financial advisor, providing myself with a steady income. The other part I spent on a comfortable life, a spacious apartment, quality medical care, a new closet. But something still kept me going. Despite the success, I couldn't forget the betrayal. I couldn't stop thinking about the house where I'd spent most of my life, the decades-old book collection, everything that had been taken from me by the people I trusted most. I woke up one morning with a clear realization. I must return to Rowlett, not for revenge, for justice, to look Tristan and Sabine in the eye, to show them that their plan hadn't worked, that they didn't break me. Now, are you sure that's a good idea? Adrian asked when I told him about my decision. Meeting them might reopen old wounds. The wounds never healed, I answered. They're just crusted over, underneath which the inflammation continues. I must do it, Adrian. Not for their sake, for my own. The preparations took months. I hired a private investigator to find out about Tristan and Sabina's current situation. The report was interesting. They were still living in my old house, but their financial situation left a lot to be desired. Tristan's agency had fallen on hard times due to the downturn in the real estate market. They had a mortgage, kids' student loans, unpaid taxes. This information gave me an advantage, but I didn't want to use it for direct pressure. My plan was more subtle. I wanted them to realize the consequences of their actions, not through financial ruin, but by understanding what they had lost by betraying me. The next step was to buy a house. Not just any house, the mansion next door to my former home, where Tristan and Sabina now lived. The three-story Victorian-style building for sale by the judge's widow was worth a fortune, but I didn't hesitate for a minute. Located across the street from my old house, the mansion gave me a perfect view. I could see Tristan and Sabina coming and going without drawing their attention. "This is a very large house for one person," the real estate agent remarked as he walked me through the spacious rooms with high ceilings. "I'll have guests," I replied, thinking of my grandchildren, whom I hardly knew because of Tristan and Sabina's isolation. Finally, I chose a car, a silver Bentley Continental, a symbol of luxury and status. Not that I was particularly interested in cars, but I knew that Tristan had always dreamed of having one. It was a small but significant touch to my plan. The move to Rowlett went smoothly. I hired an au pair, a gardener, installed a state-of-the-art security system. Everything was done methodically, without haste. I wanted my return to be flawless. The day I decided to visit Tristan and Sabina was clear fall weather. I wore my best suit, ordered from a tailor, an expensive watch, a gift from Adrian. The mirror did not reflect a broken old man, but a self-assured man who knew his worth. When I got behind the wheel of the Bentley, a strange feeling came over me. Not gloating, not revenge, but calm determination. I was not driving to destroy other people's lives, but to regain control of my own. It took less than 5 minutes to get to the old house. I stopped in front of it, looking at the familiar shape of a two-story building with a veranda where Veronique and I had once had our morning coffee and watched the sunrise. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the garden looked neglected. Tristan and Sabina had clearly skimped on the upkeep of the house. Taking a deep breath, I turned off the engine and got out of the car. The driveway, tiled with tiles I'd laid myself 30 years ago, led me to a familiar door. I pressed the bell and heard the tune Veronique had picked out. Footsteps outside the door, the click of the lock. And there it was, the moment I'd been preparing for 10 years. The door opened and Tristan appeared on the doorstep. His hair had thinned and grayed at the temples, dark circles under his eyes and bitter creases at the corners of his mouth. He was dressed in a worn shirt and homemade pants, a far cry from the dapper image he'd always maintained. For the first few seconds, Tristan stared at me, not recognizing me. Then his eyes widened, and he recoiled as if he'd seen a ghost. "Father?" His voice trembled, becoming almost a whisper. "Is that really you?" "Hello, Tristan," I said, deliberately calm, controlling every intonation. "It's been a long time." His gaze slid frantically over my suit, my watch, and stopped at the Bentley parked by the curb. The confusion on his face gradually changed to alarm. How did you?" he stammered, unable to formulate a question. Will you invite your father into the house?" I tilted my head slightly. "Or are we just going to talk on the doorstep?" Tristan stepped back awkwardly, letting me inside. I stepped over the threshold of my former home and felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and alienation. The interior had changed. Many of the things that made this house mine were gone. In place of the antique bureau in the hallway was a cheap laminated particle board dresser. Gone were the paintings that Veronique and I had collected over the years. Even the parquet I waxed every Sunday was now covered with shabby carpeting. "Is Sabina home?" I asked, walking into the living room, where the bookcases containing my collection had once stood. Now they were replaced by a huge TV and a leather couch that was showing signs of wear and tear. Tristan hesitated again, then called out, "Sabina, can you come downstairs? We have a guest." Footsteps came from upstairs, and a moment later Sabina appeared on the stairs. She hadn't changed much outwardly, the same thin face with sharp cheekbones, the same cold, appraising gaze. But her designer clothes, of which she was so proud, had given way to a simple house dress. "Oh my God," she breathed when she saw me. "Percy Schimmelner's." "The man himself," I nodded slightly. as if we were just old acquaintances meeting after a long time apart. You look beautiful, Sabina. She automatically fixed her hair, then looked at Tristan, as if seeking support. Would you like some tea? I asked, sitting down in the chair that had once been my favorite. We had a lot to talk about. Tristan and Sabina exchanged quick glances, panic in their eyes. Sabina was the first to pull herself together. Of course, Percy. I'll get it right away. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Tristan and me alone. My son slumped nervously on the edge of the couch, not knowing where to put his hands. You look good, Dad, he finally said. We didn't know. I mean, we tried to find you when you left Sunny Hills, but don't bother, Tristan. I held up my hand, interrupting the flow of lies. We both know you weren't looking for me. And what's more, you were glad I was out of your life. He blushed but didn't deny it. Where have you been all this time? He asked, clearly trying to assess the situation. It's a long story. I leaned back in my chair. Let's just say that life has given me a few unexpected twists and turns. Sabina returned with a tray with 3 cups and a teapot. I noticed that her hands were shaking slightly as she poured the tea. So, she began, sitting down next to Tristan. To what do we owe this visit? Do you need anything? Her voice was full of ill-concealed anxiety. They both thought I'd come to ask for money or help, a thought that had been on their minds ever since they'd seen me on the doorstep in my expensive suit. Need? I laughed softly. No, Sabina. I've come to tell you the news. I'm moving to Rowlett. In fact, I've already moved. Moving? Tristan frowned. Where? To the house across the street. I took a sip of tea, enjoying the look on their faces. The Pemberton Mansion. You know, that 3-story Victorian mansion with the columns? I bought it last week. The cup in Sabina's hand shook, spilling the tea onto the saucer. It's impossible, she whispered. That house is worth $4.5 million, I finished for her. Give or take a few thousand. I didn't haggle. Tristan looked at me as if I were speaking an unfamiliar language. But how? Was all he could squeeze out. I set the cup aside and leaned forward, looking them straight in the eye. You know, amazing things happen when people aren't locked up in nursing homes against their will. I kept my voice calm, but every word hit the mark. The last few years have been productive. We never wanted to, Tristan began, but I raised my hand again, stopping him. Please, Tristan, let's not lie right now. I pulled a folded piece of paper out of my jacket pocket and placed it on the coffee table. I know everything. How you convinced me to sign the power of attorney. How you sold my house to pay for my medical treatment, even though my insurance covered it. How you sold off my rare book collection, a collection I'd spent 50 years building, and that was worth a fortune. Sabina turned pale and Tristan squirmed on the couch as if trying to disappear. It was an upper-class nursing home, Sabina objected weakly. It was expensive. Sunny Hills is a mid-range facility, fully covered by insurance, I countered. I've checked all the accounts from Sabina. The money from the sale of the house and the collection, over $1 million, was never spent on my care. They simply disappeared. A heavy silence hung in the room. Tristan and Sabina looked at me with the expressions of cornered animals. What do you want? Tristan finally asked. If you've come for compensation. Compensation? I shook my head. No, Tristan, I'm long past that stage. I've come to tell you that we're neighbors now, and that I will be watching you very, very closely. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at my new house across the street. Its majestic silhouette contrasted with the dilapidated state of my former home. By the way, I know about your financial problems, I said without turning around. The late mortgage payments, the unpaid taxes, the fact that Tristan's agency was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy because of the downturn in the real estate market. I turned to them. They sat frozen in shock. Where did you? Sabina began, but stopped short. I have resources. I shrugged. And unlike you, I know how to use them wisely. Tristan stood up suddenly, his face contorted with anger and fear. What are you trying to accomplish? Do you want to see us go bankrupt? See us lose our home? Is that what you want? I looked at him with a slight sadness. My son, my own flesh and blood, had turned into a scared, angry man, ready to blame anyone but himself. I want only one thing, Tristan, I said quietly. Justice. Not legal justice, not financial justice, moral justice. At that moment, Sabina rose abruptly and staggered toward the stairs. I, I don't feel well, she mumbled, grabbing the railing. Her face had turned a greenish color. Sabina, what's wrong? Tristan rushed to her, supporting her by the elbow. Yeah, I have to lie down. She looked at me with eyes widened with fear. It's too much. I can't. Tristan helped her up the stairs, throwing me a baleful glance over his shoulder. I waited quietly in the living room, looking at the pictures on the mantelpiece. Tristan, Sabina, the two teenagers, who must have been my grandchildren, Austin and Iris. I hardly knew them. Another loss, another consequence of betrayal. A few minutes later, Tristan returned, his face tense. She's lying down, he said briefly. I think you'd better leave. Of course, I nodded. I've stayed late as it is. But before I go, I want to make one more thing clear. I pulled a small box out of my pocket and opened it, showing Tristan the contents. Gold cufflinks with emeralds. Do you recognize them? I asked. Your mother's wedding present. The only thing I had time to hide before you sent me to Sunny Hills. Tristan turned even paler. Why are you showing me this? Because these cufflinks are worth more than you got for all my stuff sold for next to nothing? I slammed the box shut and tucked it back into my pocket. Funny how life works, isn't it? I headed for the exit, but stopped at the door and turned around. Oh yes, I almost forgot. I'm organizing a small reception this Saturday. A housewarming party. You and Sabine are invited. And the children, of course. It will be interesting to meet the grandchildren. We're not coming, Tristan said. As you wish, I shrugged. But you should know that all the important people of the city will be there, including those on whom the future of your agency depends. To refuse an invitation from a respected neighbor would be unwise given your situation. Tristan clenched his fist but didn't say anything. He knew I was right. In a small town like Rowlett, reputation meant everything. And from what I'd learned, Tristan's reputation was already shaken by financial problems. The reception starts at 7, I added. I'd be glad to see the whole family. I left the house without waiting for an answer. The sun was setting, coloring the street in golden tones. As I got into the Bentley, I felt a strange feeling, not triumph, not gloating, but something akin to liberation. For the first time in 10 years, I had taken control of the situation. I was no longer a victim, a helpless old man abandoned to my fate. As I started the engine, I looked up at the house. Tristan was standing at the window watching me. His figure seemed small and lost. For a moment, I felt a pang of regret, not for my actions, but for the fact that my son had turned into a man capable of betraying his own father. Where and when had I missed raising him? What had made him this way? But these thoughts I put aside for later. Now was only the first act of the play I'd been carefully directing for the past months, and the next scenes promised to be no less dramatic. I slowly pulled out of my seat, feeling Tristan's gaze on me. Through the rearview mirror, I saw him continue to stand at the window, even as I turned the corner. He looked like a man who suddenly realized the ground was going out from under his feet. On the way home, I pondered Sabina's reaction. Her sudden malaise seemed excessive even for such a situation. In her eyes, I saw more than fear of financial exposure. There was real terror, as if she feared that I knew something more, something darker than just the story of the house and the book collection. And I intended to find out exactly what she was hiding, because my gut told me that the story of betrayal had more layers than I realized, and I was determined to uncover them all, one by one. As I drove up to my new home, I felt a strange lightness. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying around for 10 years had eased a little. It was only the beginning, but I knew now that my return to Rowlett had been the earthquake I'd wanted for Tristan and Sabina. Their world was beginning to crumble, and soon they would realize the true cost of betrayal. My reception was a success. The house, lit by hundreds of lights, shone like a beacon, attracting the attention of all Rowlett. I hired the best event planner in town, ordered gourmet hors d'oeuvres, and invited a string quartet. A catering service from neighboring Burnsville, known for catering to high society, outdid themselves. Champagne flowed, and the guests included all the important people: the mayor, owners of major businesses, a bank director, the editor-in-chief of the local newspaper. Tristan and Sabina showed up at 7 sharp, just as I'd expected. They couldn't afford to ignore the invitation. Too much was at stake. With them came their children Austin, a tall, thin young man of 19 with a wary look, and Iris, a 17-year-old girl who bore a striking resemblance to my late wife, Veronique. "I'm glad you're here," I greeted them at the door. "Especially glad to see the grandchildren." Tristan smiled strainedly. Sabina nodded with visible effort. Both of them were dressed in their best clothes, but even so, they looked out of place among the guests dressed in designer toilets and suits from famous tailors. "Thank you for the invitation," Tristan replied dryly. "It's an impressive house. Would you like a tour?" I suggested it. "I especially recommend the library. I've started to assemble a new collection of rare editions." Sabina flinched visibly at the mention of the library. The obvious allusion to my stolen books hadn't gone unnoticed. Tristan squeezed her elbow tighter. "Maybe later," he said. "I'd like to mingle with the guests first." I could see them maneuvering between groups of people, trying to make conversation. Tristan was especially trying to get the bank director's attention, probably hoping to restructure his debts. Sabina kept close to the mayor's wife, laughing harshly at her jokes. And I watched. Watching had become my new hobby, my little revenge. I watched Tristan knock back one glass after another, trying to drown out his nervousness. Sabina's irritated glances at him when he laughed too loudly or spoke out of turn. But the most interesting discovery was my grandchildren. Left by their parents, they kept to themselves. Austin at the buffet table, Iris in the corner with a book she'd apparently found in one of the rooms. I approached the girl, trying not to scare her off. "Do you like to read?" I asked, nodding at the book in her hands. Iris looked up, her eyes alert but also curious. "Yes," she said. "You have an amazing library. I've never seen so many books in one place." "Akashun, your grandfather is a retired linguistics professor," I smiled. "Books are my passion." "Grandfather," she said the word carefully as if tasting it. It was strange to call someone I barely remember that. "It's not your fault, Iris," I said softly. "Circumstances were such that we couldn't see each other." She looked at me thoughtfully. "Mom and Dad said you were sick, that you were not yourself. And you believed them?" Iris shrugged. "I was a child. Children believe their parents." "And now?" I asked, looking at her carefully. "I'm not sure what to believe anymore." She glanced at Tristan and Sabina, who were arguing quietly at the other end of the room. Especially lately. That moment was the beginning of my bonding with my grandchildren. After the reception, Iris started coming to see me almost every day after school. She was drawn to the library, the quiet of the huge house, the chance to talk about literature and languages. She was smart, much smarter than her parents, and hungry for knowledge. Austin joined in later. One day he just showed up on the doorstep with his hands in his pockets, looking down at his feet. "Iris said you have an antique record player and a collection of vinyl records," he said instead of greeting me. "That's right," I nodded. "Eshwan, would you like to hear some?" From then on, he became a frequent visitor too. Sometimes they came together, sometimes alone. I didn't ask them directly about their family life, but gradually a picture began to emerge of random comments, reservations, questions. "It's always so quiet here," Iris said one day, sitting in the library with a cup of tea. "At home, there's always shouting." "Are the parents fighting again?" I asked in a neutral tone. "When are they not fighting?" She grinned bitterly. "Ever since Dad's agency started losing clients, it's been like a powder keg at home. Austin was less forthcoming, but I got details from him too. Mom stays late at work almost every night," he said once, setting up chess pieces on the board. "She says it's an audit, but—" He didn't finish, but raised his eyebrows meaningfully. "But you think otherwise?" I asked cautiously. "I saw her in town," Austin shrugged, "at Paolo's, with a man. They didn't look like co-workers discussing work. Gradually, I learned that Sabine had been dating Hugh Bannister, a partner in a divorce law firm, for months. Their relationship was a poorly concealed secret. The whole town was whispering, but Tristan, immersed in his financial problems, remained in the dark, or pretended not to notice. Dad's trying to save the agency," Iris said, thumbing through the books on the shelf. "But the clients are leaving. He hasn't sold a single house in the last 3 months." Is the real estate market in decline? I asked, even though I already knew the answer from my sources. It's not the market, she turned to me. Dad's reputation is ruined. There are rumors that in the last deal he hid problems with the foundation of the house from the buyers. They're suing. That was news. I made a mental note to verify the information. Austin, for his part, reported that Tristan had started drinking, first in the evenings, then during the day. He became irritable, snapping at the kids over little things, sometimes not coming home at night. Mom says he sleeps at the office, works late, Austin said, making a queen move. But the agency closes at 9. Where does he go after that? I didn't bother telling him that my informants had seen Tristan in questionable bars on the outskirts of town, where he was losing the last of his money and cards. Some things children shouldn't know about their parents, no matter how imperfect. About a month after I returned to Rolett, I witnessed one of Tristan and Sabina's arguments. It happened in the late afternoon as I sat on the veranda of my new home. The windows in the house across the street were open due to the heat, and voices were echoing throughout the street. "You've ruined everything," Sabina shouted. "We had a chance to make things right, but you blew it too. I'm doing the best I can." Tristan objected, his voice sounding slurred. He must have been drunk. "Do you think it's easy to work with the sword of Damocles hanging over you?" "What sword? You're just a loser, Tristan. 10 years ago, we had a house with no mortgage, money from book sales, prospects. What about now? Debt, debt collectors, threatened eviction. Don't you dare blame just me." Tristan's voice was filled with rage. "You spent that money too, on your rags, on your beauty salons, on those stupid resorts. And who lost 50 grand at the casino in Atlantic City? Me?" Their argument went on for a long time, getting more and more heated. At one point, I saw Iris slipping out of the house and quickly headed towards my house. I met her at the door. "Can I stay with you tonight?" she asked, her eyes red with tears. "I can't listen to this anymore." Sure. I walked her into the guest bedroom, which I already tacitly considered her room. "Austin, he left this afternoon." Iris shook her head. "He said he was spending the night at a friend's house. So gradually my house became a haven for my grandchildren. They came more and more often, sometimes staying overnight, sometimes all weekend. Tristan and Sabina, absorbed in their own problems, hardly seemed to notice their absence. One morning, about 2 months after my visit with Tristan and Sabina, the doorbell rang. I opened it and saw my son on the doorstep, unshaven, with red eyes but sober and determined. "We need to talk, Dad," he said, trying to keep a straight face. I led him into the house in silence. Tristan walked into the living room and sat in a chair, rubbing his hands together nervously. "I came to apologize," he began, looking past me. "Simona, what I did 10 years ago. It was wrong." I watched him without interrupting. Sincerity? Remorse? Or just another manipulation? "I was a different person then," Tristan continued. "Ambitious, selfish. Sabina convinced me that this was the best option for everyone. That you'd get professional care, and he stammered. "And you would get my house and the money from the sale of the collection." I finished for him. Tristan lowered his head. "Yes, but I never thought it would turn out like this." "How?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "The money. It was like it was cursed." He looked up at me with a pained look. "Everything I put it into was falling apart. Deals were falling apart. Clients were leaving. Then the real estate market crashed. We took out a mortgage, thought we'd resell the house for a profit, but the market crashed," I nodded, "and you were in debt." "Yeah," he gulped. "Now the bank is threatening to foreclose. We've got 3 months to pay off the debt, or else." I waited for him to get to the point. Tristan was silent for a moment, then he looked up at me. "Dad, I know I don't deserve your help, but for the sake of the children, for Austin and Iris, could you?" "That's it." I almost smiled at how predictable that move was. "Loan you some money," I finished his thought. "Not lend," he corrected quickly. "Invest. In my agency. I can give you a share, with a return on your investment in a year. I have a plan to get the business out of the crisis." I got up and went to the window. Across the street, I could see my former house, with peeling paint, unkept garden, cracked porch steps. Does Sabina know you're here? I asked without turning around. Tristan hesitated. No, he finally admitted. She, she's against any contact with you. She thinks you came back to get back at us. Don't you think so? I think. I hope there's a little bit of the father I knew as a child left in you. I turned to him, studying his face. Was there genuine remorse in it, or just fear of financial ruin? How much do you need? And I asked. 300,000, he answered breathlessly. It would be enough to pay off the overdue payments and restart the business. I nodded slowly. I'll think about it, I said. But I need guarantees. Documents, a business plan, an independent auditor's assessment of the agency's prospects. Tristan's face brightened. Of course, I have everything. I'll bring it to you tomorrow. When he left, buoyed by hope, I called my private detective. Check all the financial records of Tristan's agency, I asked. I want to know the real state of affairs. I received the report 3 days later. It was even worse than I expected. Tristan's agency wasn't just on the verge of bankruptcy, it was already practically bankrupt. The last clients had left after the scandal of covering up defects in the house. The office was only hanging on to personal savings, which had long since run out. 300,000 wouldn't have saved the business. It only delayed the inevitable for a few months. But the most interesting discovery was another. The detective discovered that Sabina was secretly consulting with a divorce lawyer, the same Hugh Bannister with whom she was having an affair, in secret from Tristan. She was preparing the ground for a breakup, planning to leave before the financial collapse became final. That evening, Austin stopped by to see me. I didn't bother to tell him about his father's visit or his mother's plans for divorce. Instead, we played chess, discussed music, and talked about his future plans. He wanted to study engineering at university. You know, Austin said, making a hoarse move, I'm glad you're back in our lives, even with all these complications. I'm glad too, I said, and for the first time in a long time, it was the truth, without a hint of bitterness or justice. In that moment, I realized that my return to Rowlett had already led to justice, even if not the justice I'd planned. Tristan and Sabina had destroyed themselves with their greed, their lies, their disregard for their family, and I found what I thought I had lost forever, a connection to my grandchildren, a new purpose in life. And yet the story wasn't over. Tristan was still hoping for my financial intervention. Sabina was scheming behind his back. And I had to decide how far I was willing to go in my quest for justice, and what price I was willing to pay for it. After Tristan's visit asking for financial assistance, events began to unfold in an interesting scenario. The very next day, I received a phone call. I recognized Sabina's voice, polite, almost ingratiating. Percy, would you like to join us for Sunday lunch? She asked. It's been so long since we've had a family gathering. The children would be delighted. I almost smiled. This sudden change of attitude after months of coldness could only mean one thing. Tristan had told her about our conversation, and now they were working together to get my money. I'd love to, I answered. What time? 1 o'clock. Sabina's voice sounded relieved. I'll make a roast. You've always loved it, haven't you? It was a lie. I'd never been particularly fond of roasts, and Sabina would have remembered that if she'd known me better. But I didn't correct her. Sounds wonderful, I said. I'll look forward to it. After hanging up, I contacted my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, Elliot Huxley, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state. Elliot, I need your opinion on some documents, I said. And one more thing. Are you familiar with guardianship fraud and elder financial abuse laws? The meeting with Huxley took place the same day. I handed him all the documents I'd gathered over the past months. Copies of the falsified medical reports Tristan had used to convince the court to place me in guardianship. Evidence that the money from the sale of the house and collection had never been used for my care. Testimony from the nurses at Sunny Hills that I'd been fully capable during my stay there. Huxley scrutinized the documents, then raised a serious look at me. There's enough here for a criminal case, Percy, he said. Financial fraud, breach of trust, maybe even involuntary incapacity. They could get real sentences. I don't want to see them behind bars, I shook my head. At least not right now. I want them to realize what they've done. Then what exactly do you want? Prepare all the documents for filing with the court, I answered, but keep them on reserve for now. I'll let you know when the time comes. Sunday lunch at Tristan and Sabina's was a model of fake hospitality. They greeted me with strained smiles, the house was scrubbed to a shine, and the table had the best dishes they had left. Sabina had outdone herself, cooking not only a roast, but several elaborate side dishes and a dessert. It was as if she was trying to make up for a decade of neglect with one meal. Austin and Iris were clearly uncomfortable. They saw through this game. Especially Iris, who cast skeptical glances at her mother every time she overreacted to my trivial remarks. "We're so glad you're part of the family again," Tristan said, filling my glass with wine that was clearly more expensive than they could afford in their current financial situation. "Right, kids?" Austin mumbled something indistinctly, and Iris just nodded, keeping her eyes on her plate. "You know, Percy," Sabina interjected, "I've often thought about those old days, about how wrong everything was." "Wrong?" I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting wording for what you did." There was an awkward pause. Tristan and Sabina exchanged quick glances. "We made a mistake, Papa." Tristan tried to take my hand, but I stealthily pulled away. "We acted with the best of intentions, but we admit we were wrong." "Good faith?" I took a sip of wine, looking at my son carefully. "Tell me, Tristan, how did selling my rare book collection compare to the best of intentions?" Sabina laughed nervously. "Let's not talk about sad things." She tried to change the subject. "Percy, you must tell me what you've been doing all these years. By the looks of it, you've had a successful career?" I decided to play along. "Yes, you could say that," I nodded. "Life is full of surprises. Sometimes even the toughest challenges can lead to unexpected opportunities." "We're so happy for you," Sabina smiled radiantly. "Aren't we, Tristan?" "Of course," my son nodded. "And we would like to make up for lost time. Perhaps even work together." And there it was, the true purpose of this lunch. I pretended to be interested. "Working together? What do you mean?" "Psst." "Well," Tristan stepped forward, "you know about investments, right? And I have a background in real estate. We could start something together. A family business." I nodded thoughtfully as if considering the suggestion. "It's an interesting idea, especially considering the current state of your agency." Tristan paled a little, but he got over it quickly. "Temporary difficulties," he said. "The market is recovering. With the right investments, we could—" "Stop it, Dad," Iris interrupted suddenly. "Stop pretending. Both of you." She looked around at her parents. "You don't want the family business. You want Grandpa's money to save your asses." "Iris," Sabina exclaimed, "you watch your mouth, and you watch your conscience," cut off the girl, jumping up from the table. "Shermanao, you threw your grandfather out, took his house, and now you want his money? That's disgusting." She ran out of the room. Austin got up and followed her, throwing her parents a disappointed look. "Kids," Sabina tried to feign embarrassment. "Adolescent maximalism. They don't understand the complexities of adult life." "On the contrary," I argued, "I think they understand a lot more than you think." After this incident, the dinner continued in a tense atmosphere. Tristan and Sabina tried to salvage the situation by talking about their plans, about how we could become a real family. I listened, nodding in the right places, pretending to consider their suggestions. In reality, I watched them. The fake smiles, the nervous glances they exchanged, the way their shoulders tensed every time I mentioned the past. Before I left, I said the phrase I knew would start the next act of this drama. "I'll think about your offer, Tristan. But first, I need to see the agency's financials. The whole picture, unvarnished." "Ah, so, of course," he agreed hastily. "I'll have everything ready by tomorrow." Already at the door, Sabina suddenly hugged me, a gesture that should have looked sincere, but felt like another manipulation. "We're so glad you're back with us, Percy," she whispered. "It's like a second chance for our family." "Yes," I replied, pulling away gently. "A second chance." When I got home, I found Iris and Austin in my library. They had come in the back door, avoiding meeting my parents. "I'm sorry about the scene," Iris said without lifting her eyes from her book. "I just couldn't listen to their lies anymore." "It's okay," I sat down across from them. "Honesty is a rare virtue in our family. I appreciate it." "You're not going to give them money, are you?" Austin asked. "No," I answered, "but I'll let them think I am." "Why?" Iris finally looked at me. Sometimes people need to see their reflection in a crooked mirror to realize what they've become, I said. I don't want revenge on your parents. I want them to realize what they've done. Over the next few days, I methodically continued to gather evidence. With Huxley's help, I accessed Tristan and Sabina's bank statements for the past 10 years, traced the money from the sale of my house and collection. The money had not gone for my medical treatment, as they claimed, but to buy stocks that soon depreciated in value, expensive vacations, an executive car long since sold, and jewelry for Sabina. I also contacted Dr. Stern at Sunny Hills, who confirmed in writing that he never recommended my permanent stay in the facility and was surprised when I was placed there for an extended period of time. "Are you building a case against your own son?" Huxley asked as we went through the collected documents. "I'm building a lesson," I replied. "Sometimes people need to see the abyss in front of them to stop." It didn't take Tristan long to stop. The next day after lunch, he showed up at my house with a thick folder of documents. I invited him into my office where we spent several hours going over reports, balance sheets, projections. It had all been carefully edited to hide the real state of affairs: bad debt, no clients, a series of bad deals. "It looks promising," I said, closing the folder. "But I need time to study it thoroughly. I'll call you in a couple days." Tristan left with hope. I sat down at the phone and started calling people: clients who were suing Tristan's agency, bankers who refused to restructure his debt, former business partners. The picture was bleak. My son had not just failed financially, he had lost the last vestiges of professional ethics trying to get out of it. Defrauding clients, hiding defects in homes for sale, manipulating documents, the list was long and unsightly. 3 days later, I called Tristan and invited him and Sabina to dinner at my house. "I've made a decision about the investment," I said. "I want to discuss the details." They showed up exactly at the appointed time, Tristan in his best suit, which had clearly seen better days, Sabina in an elegant but old-fashioned dress. They looked like actors on stage, tense with memorized smiles, ready to play their parts. I escorted them to the dining room, where an exquisite dinner was served. We ate, exchanging minor remarks about the weather, health, city news. Not a word about money, investments, or the past, as if by unspoken agreement, these topics were put aside for later. After dessert, I suggested we move to the library. There, in leather armchairs, with glasses of cognac in our hands, we finally got down to business. "I've been studying the documents, Tristan," I began, "and I have some questions." "What kind of questions?" His voice sounded tense. "For instance, why aren't the reports showing any lawsuits from Mrs. Harper and the Donahue family? Or why no mention of late payments on loans for the last 4 months?" Tristan turned pale. Sabina nervously twirled her glass in her hands. "It's, technical details," his son tried to dismiss. "They don't affect the big picture." "On the contrary," I objected, "they are the big picture, the picture of a systematic deception." There was a long pause, then Sabina suddenly turned to Tristan. "I told you it wouldn't work." Her voice shook with anger. "He's not a fool, unlike you." "Sabina!" Tristan tried to stop her, but she was too agitated. "No, that's enough, Tristan." She set her glass down sharply on the table. 10 years I've been covering for your mistakes. 10 years of living from crisis to crisis. And you still think you can fool your father, a linguistics professor, with a few falsified reports?" Tristan jumped to his feet. "How dare you? If it weren't for your endless spending, we wouldn't be in this situation." "My spending?" Sabina stood up too, her face contorted with anger. "Who gambled away Austin's college fund? Who bought a steak in that failed restaurant without consulting me?" I watched in silence as they ripped off their masks, revealing their true selves. Years of mutual resentment and disappointment burst out in a torrent of mutual accusations. "If you'd been a normal wife, if you'd supported me," Tristan clenched his fists, "if you were a normal husband and father, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere for support." "Huh," Sabina blurted out, and immediately froze when she realized what she had said. Tristan stared at her, his face slowly changing as he realized. "Another place?" he repeated quietly. "You mean Hugh Bannister? Do you think I don't know about your business lunches?" Sabina turned pale. "Don't be silly," she tried to dismiss it, but her voice sounded unconvincing. I saw you together, Sabina, Tristan continued, in his car. You didn't look like business partners. I stealthily left the room, leaving them alone with the crumbling remnants of their marriage. Their argument continued for a long time. I could hear raised voices, the sound of breaking glass, Sabine's sobs. When I returned, they were sitting at opposite ends of the room, avoiding looking at each other. Sabina was wiping away her tears, Tristan staring out the window with an absent look. I suppose the evening is over, I said calmly. As for the investment, I'm afraid I must decline. The agency in its current state is not a viable business. So that's it then, Tristan turned to me, his eyes full of bitterness. You lured us here to watch us tear each other apart and then turn us down? I invited you here to give you a chance at sincerity, I replied. But instead of truth, I got fake reports and fake smiles. We need that money, Sabina said, her voice sounding strangled. Without it, we'll lose the house. Your grandchildren will end up on the street. My grandchildren will always find shelter in my house, I countered. And as for you, maybe losing your home will teach you to appreciate what you have instead of coveting what belongs to others. They left, broken and devastated. Sabina, a tearful one, Tristan with an expression of defeat on his face. I stood at the window, watching them cross the street without saying a word to each other. That evening, I called Huxley. Get all the paperwork ready for tomorrow's meeting, I said. It's time to show them where they stand on the edge of the abyss. The morning was clear and cold, a typical roulette fall day. I was sitting in my office going through the papers that Huxley had delivered a few hours ago. They were neatly laid out on the desk. Medical reports, bank statements, notarized witness statements, legal reviews. The evidence gathered bit by bit over the past months was adding up to an incontrovertible picture of fraud and betrayal. A phone call interrupted my musings. It was Tristan, and his voice sounded tired and strained. Dad, we need to talk, he said without greeting. After last night, I agree, Ron, I answered. Come with Sabina today at 3 o'clock. I have a proposal for you. There was a pause. A proposal? There was a note of hope in his voice. You mean, we'll discuss the details when we meet, I interrupted him. 3 o'clock, Tristan. Don't be late. I hung up without waiting for an answer. Then I dialed another number, Adrian, my former student and current friend. Is everything ready? I asked when he answered. Yes, Professor. The tickets are booked for the day after tomorrow. The apartment in Cambridge is waiting for you. All that's left is to pack your things. Thank you, Adrian. I'll call you tonight after the meeting. Then I contacted Austin and Iris, asking them to be there by 5 o'clock. They didn't ask any questions. They seemed to be used to my sometimes strange requests. In the time I had left before the meeting, I walked around the house mentally saying goodbye to it. This mansion had never been a real home for me. It was just a tool, a set for a play that was coming to an end. But I was grateful to its walls for shelter during these months of change. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Tristan and Sabina stood on the threshold, he in a rumpled suit, she in an austere, dark dress, as if she were attending a funeral. Their faces were a mixture of hope, fear, and humility. Come in, I stepped aside, letting them into the house. I led them not into the library as I usually did, but into my office, a more formal, businesslike space. There were papers on the desk and 2 suitcases next to my chair. Are you going somewhere? Sabina asked, pointing to the luggage. All in good time, Medimer, I answered, gesturing for them to sit down. They settled into the chairs across the table, their backs tense. Tristan clenched his fingers nervously. Sabina fiddled with the strap of her purse. I took a seat at the table, pausing to let the tension build. Last night was unpleasant, I finally began, but perhaps a useful one. Sometimes we need to see ourselves from the outside to realize who we've become. Dad, if this is another lecture on morality, Tristan started to get annoyed, but I held up my hand to stop him. No, Tristan, no lectures, just facts and their consequences. I pulled out the top drawer of my desk and pulled out an envelope. I promised a proposal. Here it is. I handed the envelope to Tristan. He took it bewildered, opened it, and pulled out a piece of paper, a bank check in the amount of $50,000. His eyes widened, and Sabina stepped forward, peering at the check over his shoulder. It's not enough to save the agency, I continued, but enough to avoid eviction in the coming months and give you time to find a way out. You're helping us? Tristan asked incredulously. After everything that was said yesterday, I didn't say it was a gift. I smiled slightly. The check has a price. Tristan and Sabina looked at each other, suspicion in their eyes. What's the price? Sabina asked cautiously. Instead of answering, I unfolded the file to them. Do you know what's in here? I asked, tapping my finger on the cover. Evidence. Evidence of how you falsified medical reports to declare me incompetent. How you embezzled money from the sale of the house and the collection. How you defrauded the court with false documents. All of this amounts to large-scale fraud, abuse of an elderly person's trust, forgery of documents. At a conservative estimate, 3 to 5 years in prison. For both of them. The blood drained from Sabine's face. Tristan froze as if struck by thunder. You're bluffing, he finally said. You can't have that kind of proof. I opened the folder and began to lay out the documents one by one. Dr. Stern's report, dated the day you took me out of the hospital. I put down the first sheet. Quote, patient has fully recovered from microstroke. No contraindication for independent living. And here is the medical report you submitted to the court. I put the second document next to it. The patient needs constant observation in a specialized institution. Notice the signature. It's not Stern's handwriting. Forensics confirms it's a forgery. I continued to lay out the documents, commenting on each one. Bank statements showing where the money from the sale of the house and collection went. Not a dime had been spent on my medical treatment. Instead, stocks, vacations in Europe, a premium car. Testimony from 3 nurses at Sunny Hills confirming that I was completely sane the entire time I was there. An independent psychiatrist's report on my capacity, dated the same month you granted guardianship. By the end of my presentation, Tristan was sitting with his head down and Sabina was crying quietly, covering her face with her hands. Why are you showing us this? Tristan asked quietly. If you're going to sue, just do it. I'm not going to sue, I replied, gathering the documents back into the folder. Not now, anyway. They both raised confused looks at me. I don't understand. Sabina wiped away her tears. If not the court, then the truth, I answered simply. I want you to know the truth about yourself, about what you've done. And I want you to live with that knowledge every day for the rest of your life. I leaned back in my chair, looking at them intently. A check for $50,000 isn't help, Tristan. It's compensation for the pain and humiliation I've endured because of you. A tiny fraction of what you owe me. Whether you accept it or refuse it is up to you. But know this is all you will ever get from me. And the papers? Tristan nodded at the folder. What about them? They'll stay with my lawyer, I answered. With instructions to prosecute under certain circumstances. What circumstances? Sabina asked tensely. If you ever try to deceive or use me again, if you prevent me from communicating with my grandchildren, if you don't stop spreading lies about my mental health. I pulled another document from my desk drawer and held it out to Tristan. Sign it. It's an admission of what you've done and an undertaking not to violate said terms. Tristan took the paper with trembling hands, ran his eyes over the text. And if we refuse, then I'll turn it over to the prosecutor's office today, I said calmly. And instead of financial collapse, you will face criminal prosecution. The choice is yours. There was a heavy silence. Tristan and Sabina exchanged a long look, their eyes wide with fear, shame, and the realization of the hopelessness of the situation. Finally, Tristan took the pen and signed the document. Sabina followed suit, her signature barely legible because of her trembling fingers. That's it, I said, taking the signed confession. You can go now. That's it? Tristan looked lost. No. Forgiveness? Sonam, I shook my head. No, Tristan. Maybe someday. But not today. They rose, moving as if in slow motion. Sabina looked a dozen years older. Tristan looked broken. And the suitcases? He asked suddenly, pointing to the luggage next to my chair. Are you really leaving? Yes, I nodded. My work in Rowlett is finished. I'm going back to Cambridge, where a research position at the Linguistics Center awaits me. So this house, Sabina began. I'm selling it, I replied. A buyer has already been found. The deal closes next week. They headed for the exit, but at the study door, Tristan stopped and turned around. Why are you doing this, Dad? He asked quietly. Why aren't you suing? Why don't you seek justice? I looked at my son, and for the first time in a long time, I saw in him not just greed and fear, but a glimmer of understanding. Because justice isn't always punishment, Tristan, I answered. Sometimes it's just the truth about who we've become and what we've done, and the ability to live with that truth, even if it's painful. When they left, I went to the window and watched them cross the street, heading toward their, once Mino's house. They walked apart, not touching each other, not talking. Two people linked by the past, but without a common future. At 5 o'clock sharp, Austin and Iris arrived. They entered without knocking. My house had become a second home to them over the past few months. You wanted to see us, Grandpa? Iris asked, walking into the study. Her gaze immediately fell on the suitcases. Are you going somewhere? We're leaving, I corrected. If you agree, of course. I told them about my assignment to the Cambridge Language Center, about the apartment I'd rented there, which was big enough for 3 people. That Cambridge had an excellent engineering college where Austin could study, and an art school that I was sure Iris would be interested in. Hey, do you want us to come with you? Austin looked stunned. For good? It's your choice, I answered. You're adults, capable of making decisions. I'm just offering an alternative. They looked at each other, silently conferring, as close people often do. What about Mom and Dad? Iris asked. Have you talked to them about it? No, I shook my head. It's your decision, not theirs. They got everything they deserve from me. Now it's your turn to get what you deserve, a chance at a new life. Austin rubbed his chin thoughtfully. When do we decide? The plane the day after tomorrow morning, I answered. But if you need more time, you can always come back later. They exchanged glances again. I'm going, Iris said firmly. There's nothing left here but debts and quarrels. And in Cambridge, a new beginning. Austin paused, then nodded. So am I, but I need to pack. Talk to my parents. Sure, I agreed. You have a day to pack. We'll spend the last night here tomorrow night, and then we'll leave for the airport in the morning. When they left, I was alone again in the big empty house. I walked around the rooms, checking to see if I had forgotten anything important. All my personal belongings were already packed away, and the furniture was left to its new owners. I lingered only in the library, saying goodbye to the books. The beginnings of a new collection I'd decided not to take with me. Let it stay here, a reminder that you can always start over, even if you've lost your most precious possessions. The next evening, Austin and Iris returned with suitcases, not too big apparently, just the essentials. I could tell from their tense faces that the conversation with their parents had not been easy. They tried to talk us out of it, Iris said, settling into the living room. Especially Mom. First she begged, then she threatened. Dad just kept quiet, Austin added, and then he said we had the right to choose our own destiny. It was unexpected. I nodded. Maybe Tristan had learned a lesson from our meeting after all. A small step toward realization, but a step nonetheless. We spent our last night in Rowlett quietly, watching old movies, talking about future plans, avoiding mention of the past. The grandchildren talked about their dreams, what they wanted to do. I listened, enjoying their enthusiasm and energy. They reminded me of myself at their age, full of hope, ready to conquer the world. In the morning, as we were loading our suitcases into the cab, I noticed Tristan and Sabina watching us from the window of their house. They were standing next to each other, but not touching, 2 silhouettes against the curtains. I raised my hand in a parting gesture. After a second's hesitation, Tristan returned the favor. Sabina turned away. On the way to the airport, I stared out the window at the scenery of Rowlett, the city that had been my home for most of my life, the city I'd left 10 years ago as a penniless old man and was now leaving as a successful man with a new family. The circle had closed, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. What are you thinking about, Grandpa? Iris asked, noticing my thoughtfulness. About how strange life is, I answered. 10 years ago, I thought I had lost everything, but it turned out I just made room for something new. Don't you wish you'd sued them? Austin asked. After everything they did, I shook my head. Revenge is the easy way, but it's not always the right way. They got their justice. Now they live with the truth about themselves. And we We're free to move on. The cab pulled onto the highway leading to the airport. I leaned back in the seat, feeling strangely light. The revenge I'd planned when I returned to Rolet had been transformed into something else. Liberation. Not just for me, but for Austin and Iris. At the airport, waiting to board, I looked at my grandchildren. They were animatedly discussing Cambridge, the universities, the new life that awaited them. Their eyes glowed with anticipation of adventure. I smiled, feeling the last vestiges of bitterness leave me. Tristan and Sabina's betrayal 10 years ago had ruined my old life, but it had led to a new one, maybe even a better one. I had found grandchildren, found purpose, found freedom from the past. When they announced boarding for our flight, we stood up, ready for a new beginning. I looked back one last time, mentally saying goodbye to Rolet and everything he meant to me, good and bad. Ready? I asked Austin and Iris. They nodded, their faces glowing with determination and hope. We stepped toward the boarding gate, leaving behind old lives and old grudges. Ahead was Cambridge, new opportunities, new horizons. Freedom was ahead,